A year ago, the mighty forces of the Japanese Empire had completed the conquest of the Dutch East Indies, one of their most important military objectives upon the start of the Pacific War. With this victory, they believed they could take the fight as far as India, Australia, and even Hawaii. Yet today the tables have turned completely. Their only hope to protect their prized gains long enough for their forces to retake the initiative. Time would prove this to be impossible. But in the meantime, after the disastrous Battle of the Bismarck Sea and the end of the Guadalcanal campaign, we have entered into a phase of relative calmness in the Pacific. In Burma, however, war was raging as fiercely as ever for the brave British and Indian soldiers. In this episode, join us as we continue to cover the long-range penetration of the Chindits in what is known as Operation Longcloth. Hey history fans, as you know, the YouTube algorithm precludes us from releasing more than 3 or 4 videos per week. As the more we release, the lower the average views are, which hurts the overall standing of the channel in search rankings and such. Still, we produce more videos than that, and we want to give our viewers a chance to watch them. Videos are now published as YouTube member and Patreon exclusives. For just $5 per month, yes, 1 cup of coffee, you'll get access to 25 new videos. Currently, we're running 2 battle series, the Peloponnesian Wars and the Italian Unification Wars. Click the link in the description or pinned comment, and you'll get exclusive videos, early access to all videos, learn our schedule, get access to our private Discord, watch our behind-the-scenes videos, and much more. Thank you for watching and your kind support. We wouldn't be able to do what we love without you. A few episodes ago, we covered the formation of the Chindits and the start of Operation Longcloth, the first long-range penetration of Burma. Today, we'll continue with the coverage of the first Chindits expedition. Yet to fully understand the situation, we first have to look at 2 places, Fort Hertz and Lado. Starting with the first one, Fort Hertz was a remote British outpost in the district of Putao, which was itself inhabited by the native Kachin people. During General Slim's retreat back to India, it was believed that Fort Hertz had been evacuated as well. Yet the base would instead see the arrival of retreating British and Indian soldiers, who would continue to man the outpost as they uneasily awaited a Japanese attack that would never come. It is believed that the Japanese decided not to continue their drive towards the northern Burmese border because they thought no enemy outpost could be maintained in such a remote place. Nonetheless, military authorities in India lacked communications with Fort Hertz, and thus they would also be oblivious to the fact that the outpost was still in Allied hands until August 12, 1942, when units of the 50th Indian Parachute Brigade overflew the fort and made the unexpected discovery. From this point onwards, various parties would be flown to reinforce the outpost, to bring engineering supplies for the reconstruction of its inoperable airstrip, and to extract those extenuated soldiers that had survived the Burma exodus. Furthermore, a special force, known as the Northern Kachin Levies, would be formed, composed of members of the Kachin people under the command of British officers. In the meantime, General Stilwell would oversee the construction of a new base at Lado, which would allow American engineers to start the construction of a road connecting India and China, thus opening a new lifeline for the forces of the Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek. The Lado Road, however, was to be 1,072 miles long. It was projected that completion of this road would take a long time and many resources. Yet this was deemed necessary to support the Chinese in their war effort against Japan. Back in December 1942, the 45th American Engineer Regiment and the 823rd Engineer Aviation Battalion, 2 African-American units, would finally arrive to start working on the first segment of this immense project, connecting Lado to the Hukong Valley. For these 103 miles through the juncture of the Patkai and Naga Hills, the American engineers, under Major General Raymond Wheeler, would have to brave the difficult Pangsau Pass of 3,727 feet in altitude, before dropping to 700 feet at Xingbuyang. By January 20th, 1943, construction was on a 24-hour-a-day basis, and the rate was 3/4 of a mile a day of all-weather single-track roadway with turnouts. On February 18th, Wheeler would further be placed to command the defense of the Lado sector, and 10 days later, despite the skeptical estimates of the British experts, road construction would finally cross the Burmese border. Meanwhile, the 18th Division of General Mutaguchi, an elite force that had participated in the Malaya and Burma campaigns, as well as in the early offensives against China, had taken over the responsibility of defending northern Burma. Logistically fatigued by its heavy fighting, Mutaguchi was content to simply garrison the country, deploying one regiment at the Hukong Valley, one in the Indore area, and the last one at Myitkyina. In time, however, the guerrilla activities of the Kachin insurgents would force Mutaguchi's forces to embark in rigorous patrolling of the area north of Myitkyina, leaving the 18th Division vulnerable to attrition and with few replacements available for casualties. Therefore, by February 1943, Mutaguchi had redirected his attention to the Kachin state, planning to send the 114th Regiment to attack Fort Hertz and Haklak Gar, one of the most important bases of the Kachin levies that also screened the building of the Lado Road. This was one of the main reasons Field Marshal Wavell and Brigadier Wingate wanted to launch Operation Longcloth in an effort to prevent the offensive against Fort Hertz, whose loss would threaten Lado and the Humpere route. Nonetheless, by February, a battalion of the 114th Regiment was posed to launch the planned punitive attack on Sumprabum. So on March 1st, the Kachin would evacuate the village and disperse before the arrival of the enemy. Another Japanese battalion would also strike the Indian and Kachin garrisons at Haklak Gar, forcing the Allied forces to retreat to the Chinese-defended outpost at Nathkor. Many anxious days followed, as it seemed nothing would stop the Japanese from taking Fort Hertz and the Lado Road. But luckily, it was time for Brigadier Wingate to step up. As we last saw, the northern group had at last crossed the Sibiu Tongdan range by the end of February. On March 1st, Wingate would then bivouac near Pinbon, sending ahead columns 3 and 5 towards the railway, although the original target in the Indore area would be moved further south, directing columns 7 and 8 to cause a diversion in the area around Pinlebu, and ordering column 4 to bypass Pinbon and ambush the Mansi Motor Road. In the meantime, the southern group of Colonel Alexander had continued its arduous march from the Thektor area towards the Kyaikthyn Railway in late February, with Major George Dunlop's Column 1 starting bridge demolitions between Kowloon and Kyaikthyn around February 20th. By March 1st, Column 1 was about to reach the railway, and Major Arthur Emmett's Column 2 was following close behind them, around Yin Dike. As we've seen, at this point the Japanese had turned their full attention to the menace behind their lines, so both the 18th and 33rd Divisions were sending forces to counter the Chindits' incursions. In the south, General Sakurai decided to send his 215th Regiment to Kyaikthyn to mop up the enemy there, while in the north, Mutaguchi assigned the 55th Regiment of Colonel Koba Hiroshi to find and destroy the Chindit force. Koba would then personally lead the bulk of his 1st Battalion to the town of Indore, while his other forces searched for the British guerrillas. On March 2nd, Column 1 and Column 2 finally reached the outskirts of Kyaikthyn, with Dunlop having the mission to blow up the railway bridge, while Emmett was to attack the railway station itself. Unbeknownst to the Chindits, however, a full company had arrived at the railway station to defend it, and they now lay in wait just a short ways up the track. By nightfall, as Emmett marched down the line of the narrow-gauge railway with Japanese eyes following their progress, Column 2 would ultimately walk into the enemy ambush. In the black of the jungle, the Japanese suddenly began to fire their mortars and machine guns, inflicting heavy casualties on the unsuspecting Gurkhas. The Japanese then charged, and close combat ensued, eventually forcing Emmett to order his forces to disperse and retreat in small groups. Half of the column would then rendezvous with Emmett, and the Gurkhas would start their march back towards the Chindwin, fighting a rearguard action all the way to the river. In confusion, the other half of the column withdrew with Colonel Alexander towards the east, as was the original plan, and so they would continue on towards the Irrawaddy. Meanwhile, Dunlop's Column 1 would successfully blow up the railway bridge the following night, then continuing east and joining Alexander's group at Hinthaw on March 7th. By March 10th, the remnants of the southern group had crossed the Irrawaddy at Tagong and were set to continue eastwards. Although Emmet's attack on Kyaikh Thyn had failed, the main mission of Alexander's southern group was to attract the enemy towards them and away from Wingate's main forces, an objective that had been completed fully, as both Emmet and Dunlop's forces would see the Japanese pursue them closely as they retreated. Looking back north, Wingate had also decided to leave the Mu Valley behind on March 2nd to prevent the enemy from catching him, boldly marching towards Ongon in the south. By March 3rd, columns 3 and 5 were 3 days' march from the railway, and they were in desperate need of a diversion. Such a diversion would come on March 4th, as Major Walter Scott's Column 8 successfully attacked the Japanese garrison at Pinlebu, before rejoining Wingate and Major Kenneth Gleek's Column 7 at Ongon. Owing to the Japanese offensive-mindedness at this stage of the Burma conflict, elements of the 55th Regiment were then rushed from the area of the railway towards the Chindit diversion in order to counter the threat on Pinlebu. At the same time, Major George Bromhead's Column 4 was returning from their diversion north of Pinbon, through the mountains in the neighbourhood of Nyangwon, when the undergrowth came alive with enemy small arms fire. Half of the formation had already crossed a small stream when a shower of enemy mortar bombs also began to fall on the ford, preventing the rest from crossing. Trapped, 135 men tried to escape to the north, most of them reaching Fort Hertz in a state of near collapse, while the remainder of the column, without supplies, would decide to march back to the Chindwin. Remarkably, Column 4 would only suffer very light casualties during this ambush, yet it was effectively put out of action. In the next few days, the Chindits would continue to move unhindered towards their assigned objectives, and on March 6th, Major Mike Calvert's Column 3 would reach the area around the Nankan railway station, while at the same time, Major Bernard Ferguson's Column 5 was arriving at the Bongyong area. As Calvert immediately sent a Burma Rifles patrol to the station, he decided to divide his column into 2 demolition parties, 3 covering sections, and a transport and headquarters group, the latter to remain hidden in the jungle. The scouts then returned with the information that, although there were no enemy soldiers at Nankan, there were 200 Japanese at Wintho that could arrive fast enough through a motor road that led straight to the station. Calvert thus ordered to set up roadblocks and ambush positions on both sides of this road and on the Indore Road. At noon, the 2 demolition parties moved to the railway on separate sites and began to lay charges on the line as they went. While Calvert's men were preparing to blow up their bridges, 2 truckloads of Japanese soldiers, accompanied by an armoured vehicle, came lumbering down the motor road from Indore. As they immediately fell into the Chindits' ambush, one of the trucks would be destroyed by an anti-tank rifle, and the Japanese would subsequently dig in under heavy machine gun fire. In time, however, more Japanese reinforcements would start to arrive, leaving the Chindits outnumbered 3-1, so a party of Burma Rifles would be sent to hold off the enemy attack. After 3.5 hours of work, just as the Japanese were to take control of Nankan village, the demolitions were finally about to start. With a large boom and a great roar, 6 miles of railway and 3 bridges were suddenly in complete shambles. Calvert's demolition parties would then retreat to the Nankan station, and, under enemy fire, they would demolish a 4th bridge before withdrawing. By this point, most of Column 3's parties, reinforced by around 50 Chindits of Column 7 with heavy weapons, had also regrouped at the station, and were firing with their mortars and machine guns at the Japanese attempting to cross the open ground to outflank them. As the firing petered out and darkness approached, Calvert and his men withdrew towards the Irrawaddy without losing a man, and accounting for over 50 of the enemy. Apart from destroying the bridges, they had also cut the railway line in 70 places, and left numerous booby traps in their wake, bringing their operation to a successful conclusion. Meanwhile, Ferguson's Column 5 prepared to launch its attack on Bongyong. Ferguson had divided his column into 3 main parties. 40 men were to deal with an enemy post to the south at Kyaukhin. A rifle platoon and some commandos were ordered to mine both sides of the Byongyong Gorge and blow it down onto the railway line, and Ferguson's headquarters, together with a rifle platoon and commando section, would attack Bongyong Station and blow the railway bridge. While the demolition party set out to do their work, the 40 Chindits that attacked Kyokin would bump into a truck full of Japanese, quickly engaging them in a 15-minute firefight that resulted in 15 Japanese dead. But as the Chindits prepared to retreat, an enemy machine gun suddenly opened fire, killing 4 and mortally wounding 6. Their sacrifice would not be in vain, however, as the railway bridge at Bongyong would be successfully blown by nightfall. At the gorge, the fuses were similarly lit, and with a tremendous explosion, a landslide of hundreds of tons of rock tumbled down onto the railway line. Infuriated, Colonel Koba would take 2 companies under his own command and hurried from Indore to the Irrawaddy after learning of the 2 attacks on the railway. The success of Wingate's Operation Loincloth was complete, as his actions would also draw the attention of Mutaguchi himself, who had no other choice but to order the 114th Regiment to pull back from their operations against Fort Hertz and the Lado Road, thus saving both key places from falling into the hands of the Japanese, to the great relief of the British and American military authorities. This would further be one of Mutaguchi's last actions in command of the 18th Division, as he would be promoted to lead the 15th Army on March 18th, getting replaced by Lieutenant General Tanaka Shinichi as the commander of the 18th Division. But Wingate now had to decide how he would escape the wrath of the Japanese, who were moving with speed to crush him. Finally, on March 11th, he would order Calvert to take command of columns 3 and 5 and move towards the Gotaik Gorge on the Meimyo-Lashio Road, with the secret mission of blowing up its viaduct. He would direct Southern Group to move towards Mongmit to rendezvous with the Kachin guerrillas, and he would decide to lead himself columns 7 and 8 towards the village of Twebo to cross the Irrawaddy River and raid Iniwa, one of the main bases of the Burmese independence forces. But that is it for this week, although we'll continue to cover Wingate's first expedition with the Chindits in the future. Next episode, we'll head back to the North Pacific to cover some new developments in the defense of Alaska, as the Americans and the Japanese were about to collide yet again in another important naval engagement, the Battle of the Komandosky Islands. To see it, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.